Welcome, my friend. I am so happy you are here with me today on Learn English Through History. Before we begin our story together, I want you to do something simple. Not a slow breath in. Hold it for just a moment. Now let it out slowly. Good. Now you are ready. Close your eyes if you want, or keep them open. Does not matter. What matters is that you are here, and we are about to travel together to a time long ago. Imagine a cold morning in December. The year is 1777. You are standing in a field covered in snow. Your feet hurt because you have no shoes. You wrap your arms around your body to stay warm. You are hungry. Not you are tired. And you do not know if you will see the spring. Around you, thousands of men stand in the same cold. They are not soldiers from a rich country. They are farmers, carpenters, and young boys. They have almost nothing. No warm coats, no good food, no hope. And yet they stay. Why do they stay? Because of one man. What quiet man who walks among them every day, and who feels the same cold, the same hunger, the same fear. But he does not leave. Not he stays with them. He suffers with them. And because of that, they believe they can survive. But who was this man? What made him so special? Was he born strong and fearless? Was he always a great leader? The answer might surprise you, because before he became the man in the snow, he was just a boy who lost his father when he was very young, boy who did not have much money, boy who was afraid, just like you and me. Let us go back to the beginning. Let us travel to the year 1732. The place is a land called Virginia. Virginia is on the east coast of North America. But at that time, Virginia is not a free country. It is a colony. Do you know what a colony is? Let me explain. A colony is a place that belongs to another country far away. The people in Virginia had to follow the rules of a king who lived across the ocean. That king was King of England. The people had to pay taxes to him. Taxes are money you give to the government. They had to obey his laws. And they could not choose their own leaders. This made many people unhappy. But for a long time, they did nothing about it. The 22nd of February in 1732, a baby boy was born in Virginia. His parents named him George Washington. George's family was not rich, but they were not very poor either. They had land, and in those days, land was very important. If you had land, you could grow food, you could build a house, you could have a good life. George's father was a man named Augustine Washington. He worked hard every day to take care of his family. They lived near a river called the Rappahannock. Young George loved to watch the water flow slowly past the green fields. It was a peaceful life. But life can change very quickly. For young George, that change came when he was just 11 years old. His father died. This was a terrible moment. In those days, when a father died, the oldest son received most of the land and money. George was not the oldest son. He had older half-brothers named Lawrence and Augustine. They received more than George did. George received some land, but not enough to build the life he dreamed of. This lost everything that came after. Without his father, George had to grow up fast. He could not go to a fine school. He studied mathematics. He practiced writing. He learned how to measure land. This skill is called surveying. A surveyor measures land to know exactly how big it is. This skill would become very important for George later. Even as a young boy, people noticed something about George. He was tall for his age. He was serious. He listened more than he spoke, and he worked very hard at everything he tried. His older brother Lawrence became like a father to him. Lawrence had been a soldier. I told George stories about battles and honor and courage. These stories planted a seed in young George's heart. A quiet dream began to grow. Could he, a boy without money or a good education, one day become something more? He did not know the answer, but he was determined to find out. George Washington was 21 years old when he first went to war. The year was 1753. The trouble was in a place called the Ohio Valley. England and France both wanted this land. Both countries sent soldiers. The young colony of Virginia sent George Washington. But he was chosen to carry an important message to the French soldiers. The message was simple. Leave this land. It belongs to England. It's a dangerous journey. George had to travel through cold forests. He crossed frozen rivers. One time he almost drowned. He fell into the icy water, and his clothes became heavy with cold. We thought he might die. But he did not give up. No, he pulled himself out. Not kept walking. Completed his mission. He delivered the message to the French Maino commander, but the French refused to leave. They said the land belonged to them, and so the fighting began. In 1754, George Washington led soldiers into battle for the first time. Did not go well. A small group of men fought against a much larger French force. They were surrounded. George had to surrender. Surrender means to stop fighting and give up. It was his first real defeat. Felt ashamed. Felt like a failure. But something important happened in that moment. George did not run away from his failure. He studied it. He thought carefully about what went wrong. He learned from his mistakes. This is one of the most important lessons from George Washington's life. It is a good lesson for all of us who are learning English. Failure is not the end of the story. Failure is often where the real story begins. When you make a mistake in English, do not feel bad. Do not give up. Look at your mistake. Learn from it. And try again. That is what George Washington did. After those early battles, George Washington returned to his home in Virginia. He lived on a farm called Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon was a beautiful place. It sat on a hill next to a wide river called the Potomac. George loved this land very much. He worked hard to take care of it. He woke up early every morning. He worked long hours. He kept careful records of everything on his farm. As a patient and careful man. In 1759, George married a woman named Martha Dandridge Custis. Martha was a widow. Widow is a woman whose husband has died. She had 2 young children from her first marriage. George raised them as his own children. He was a kind and loving father. People who knew George during these years said he was calm and serious. He enjoyed simple pleasures. He liked to ride his horse. I enjoyed dancing at local parties. He was known for his quiet presence. When he walked into a room, people noticed him. But he did not try to be the center of attention. Beneath this quiet life, something was growing. The people of Virginia trusted George Washington. Not elected, they elected him to serve in their local government. Elected means chosen by voting. As the years passed, More and more people in the American colonies began to feel something uncomfortable. They felt that King of England was asking too much from them, asked them to pay heavy taxes. The people had to follow rules made by people far away, who did not understand their lives. This feeling grew slowly, like a small fire that becomes larger and larger. And George Washington could feel it, too. By 1775, the American colonies were on the edge of open war with England. Meetings were held in a building in Philadelphia. Voices grew louder. The men who led the colonies had to make a difficult decision. They needed someone to lead their army. Someone the people trusted. Someone who was calm under pressure. Someone who could hold an army together, even in the darkest moments. They chose George Washington, who accepted the job, but not with excitement. He accepted with quiet seriousness, stood before the other leaders, and spoke honestly. I told them he did not know if he was truly ready for this responsibility. Not he hoped he had the skills required, but he was not certain. This honesty was itself a kind of strength. A weaker man would have pretended to be confident. Washington chose to be honest about his fear. In June of 1775, George Washington became the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Commander-in-Chief means the highest leader of all the soldiers. His soldiers were not professional fighters. Professional means trained and paid to do a job. Many of his soldiers were farmers. Some were tradesmen. Tradesmen are people who make things with their hands, like carpenters or blacksmiths. They had almost no training. They had very few weapons. They had very little food. And they had almost no money. England, on the other side, had one of the most powerful armies in the world. Their soldiers were trained. They had good weapons. They had warm coats and shoes. They had ships and cannons. The situation looked impossible. How could a small group of farmers defeat the strongest army in the world? Most people thought it was impossible. But George Washington did not think about impossibility. He thought about what he could do today, and then tomorrow, and then the next day. What came next was not a story of easy victory. It was a story of survival, a story of suffering, a story of a kind of courage that most of us will never be asked to show. George Washington led his small army into battle after battle. Lost more battles than he won. He retreated many times. Retreat means to move backward, away from the enemy. Each time he lost, he learned something. Each time he retreated, he kept his army alive, understood something important. He did not need to destroy the British army completely. He only needed to keep his own army alive long enough for England to grow tired of the war. It was a strategy of patience, strategy of survival. And slowly, very slowly, it began to work. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was one of the most difficult times in George Washington's life. His army was camped at a place called Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. The weather was brutal. Brutal means very harsh and cruel. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. The snow was deep. The wind was sharp, like a knife. The soldiers had very little food. Some days they ate nothing but a small piece of hard bread. Many had no proper shoes. They walked through snow and ice with bare feet. Their feet became wrapped in old cloth to keep them from freezing. Thousands of men became sick. Hundreds died. It was a terrible, terrible time. George Washington walked among his soldiers every day. I saw their suffering with his own eyes. I did not stay in a warm tent while his men suffered. I stayed with them. We felt the same cold, felt the same hunger. I wrote letters to the government asking for supplies. I asked for food. He asked for clothing, asked for medicine. Not Bamai, he begged. Not good, he argued. He warned that the army would fall apart. Nothing changed. And through all of this, he stayed. Did not leave. I did not give up. Chose to suffer alongside his men. This is what made him different from other leaders. He did not ask his soldiers to do anything he would not do himself. He shared their pain. And because of that, his soldiers loved him. They trusted him. They would follow him anywhere. There is a famous story about George Washington at Valley Forge. People say that someone saw him kneeling in the snow, praying quietly. Whether this exact moment happened or not, no one can say for certain. But what is certain is this: Washington carried the weight of that winter inside him. Every day was a struggle. Every night was a question. Would they survive until morning? When spring came, the army had survived. But they were not the same army that had arrived in winter. They were stronger. They were more united. United means joined together as one group. They had learned how to fight together. A man named Baron von Steuben, a soldier from Germany, had trained them during the long winter months. At Hamat Patch together, not to attack together, not to be a real army. The soldiers who made it through Valley Forge believed in a new and deeper way that they could win. Valley Forge was not a battle. No fighting happened there. It may have been the moment where the war was truly decided. The cold winter did not break them. It made them stronger. The American Revolutionary War lasted 8 long years, not 1775 to 1783. During that time, George Washington lost many battles. He retreated more than he attacked. Not technology. There were moments when the situation seemed completely hopeless. Some soldiers left the army. They went home to their families. Supplies ran out again and again. Some of Washington's own officers doubted him. They wondered if he was the right man to lead. But Washington had learned something important from his early failures. He knew that patience was more powerful than pride. He knew that survival was victory. He did not need to win every battle. He only needed to keep his army alive. If his army stayed alive, England would eventually grow tired. England was far away across the ocean. Sending soldiers and supplies cost a lot of money. The British people at home were growing tired of the war. They wanted it to end. Help came from an unexpected place. Unexpected means not expected, surprising. France became America's ally. An ally is a friend who helps you in a fight. France was the old enemy from Washington's early battles. But now they were friends. French soldiers came to help. French ships came to help. And with this help, the tide of the war began to change. In 1781, at a place called Yorktown in Virginia, the British army was surrounded. Surrounded means closed in on all sides. The British commander, Lord Cornwallis, knew he could not win. His soldiers were trapped between the American army on land and the French ships on the water. There was no escape. On October 19, 1781, Lord Cornwallis surrendered. Surrendered means he stopped fighting and gave up. It was the final major battle of the American Revolutionary War. The war. When the news spread, people celebrated in the streets. They rang bells. They lit fires. They cried with joy. And George Washington, now 50 years old, stood quietly in the midst of it all. He had done what most people thought was impossible. He had led a small, poor, and untrained army against one of the greatest military powers in the world, and he had guided it slowly, painfully, to victory. But the story was not finished. Something remarkable happened next. Something that the world had almost never seen before. George Washington gave up his power. He could have become a king. Many people wanted him to be king. Soldiers loved him. The people trusted him. He had the army behind him. In almost every other country in history, a man in that position would have taken the throne. But Washington refused. In December of 1783, he returned his military commission to the Congress. Not by commission is an official document that gives someone authority. He thanked his officers. He said goodbye to his soldiers. And then he went home to Mount Vernon. Not just like that. A man who could have ruled a nation chose instead to return to his farm. This act shocked the world. George III of England, when he heard about it, reportedly said something remarkable. He said that if Washington truly gave up his power, he was the greatest man in the world. But the story continued. The new country needed a leader, not a president. Not once again, the people turned to George Washington. In 1789, he was elected as the first president of the United States of America. He did not want the job. He was tired. He wanted to stay at Mount Vernon with his family. He wanted to live a quiet life on his farm. But for Washington, duty was always more important than personal desire. Duty means something you must do because it is your responsibility. So he accepted the job. George Washington served 2 terms as president, 1789 to 1797. Term is a period of time in a job. Helped build the government of a country that had never existed before. There were no rules, no examples to follow. I had to decide everything for the first time. He made decisions that shaped American law. He helped create the economy. The economy is the system of money and business in a country. We made decisions about foreign policy. Foreign policy is how a country talks and works with other countries. His choices affected generations to come. Generations means groups of people born around the same time. I chose not to serve a 3rd term. Could have been president for life. Many people wanted him to stay, but he believed that no one should hold too much power for too long. Not set a tradition that American presidents followed for over 150 years. Tradition is a custom or practice that continues over time. But we must also talk about the difficult parts of George Washington's story. Because no person is perfect, not Notha. And honest stories are the ones that truly teach us something. George Washington owned enslaved people. Enslaved people are people who are forced to work without pay and cannot leave. They are treated as property. This is a historical fact, a painful one. At the time of his death, more than 300 enslaved people lived and worked on his land. Washington knew, in some part of himself, that this was wrong. I struggled with it privately, wrote about it in his letters, did not speak publicly about it, but in his will, he made an unusual decision for that time. Will is a document that says what happens to your things after you die. He ordered that the enslaved people he personally owned should be freed after his wife Martha's death. Freed means given freedom. Was a small step, an incomplete step, but it was a step that many other men of his time and wealth did not take. We remember George Washington as a great man, and he was great in many ways. But he was also a man of his time, with the limits and failures that all human beings carry. Understanding this does not make his achievements smaller. It makes his story more honest. George Washington died on December the 14th, 1799, and he was 67 years old. In his final days, he became sick with a throat infection. Not throat infection is an illness that makes it hard to swallow or breathe. The doctors came to help him, but the medicine they used was not helpful. In those days, doctors did not know as much as they know now. They tried many things. Nothing worked. Washington faced death the same way he faced everything in his life. Not quietly, not calmly, without complaint, not shout or cry. I did not ask why this was happening to him, not accepted it. I said goodbye to his wife Martha. I spoke to his doctors and thanked them for their help. And then he closed his eyes for the last time. When the news spread across America and around the world, people mourned deeply. Mourned means they felt great sadness because someone died. A man who had led an army through impossible winters. A man who had refused a crown. Not by technology. The man who had helped build a new kind of government. He was gone. Not what he left behind was not only a country. He left behind something harder to see, but just as real. Left behind a way of living. A belief that ordinary people, imperfect and uncertain, can do extraordinary things. If they show up every day. If they keep going when the road is hard. If they choose duty over comfort and patience over pride. Think about that for a moment. George Washington was not born a hero. He was not rich. He did not have a perfect education. Failed many times. He lost battles, made mistakes. I felt fear. He felt doubt. But he kept going. That is what made him great. Not his victories. His willingness to continue after defeat. Not for you, my friend. Listening to this story today, there is a message here that goes beyond history. You are on a journey too. Learning English is not easy. Some days the words are difficult. Some days you feel like you are standing in the snow with no shoes. Some days you want to give up, but you keep going. You keep listening. You keep learning. That, in its own quiet way, is exactly the kind of courage that Washington showed. When you fall, get back up. When you make a mistake, learn from it. When the road is dark, take one more step. That is how mountains are climbed. One step at a time. That is how languages are learned. One word at a time. That is how a new country was born. One cold winter at a time. Not technology. Thank you for walking through this story with me today on Learn English Through History. I am so grateful you were here. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to share it with a friend who is also learning English. Leave a comment below and tell me, which part of George Washington's story stayed with you the most? Was it the cold winter at Valley Forge? Was it the moment he gave up his power? Or was it the simple fact that he kept going even after losing so many battles? I would love to read your answer. Come back for our next story. Next story. Because the journey of discovery continues. And I will be here, waiting for you. Till then, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, every step you take brings you closer to your goal. One step at a time. Just like George Washington. Not he walked through the snow. Not he felt the cold. Why not to give up? But he did not. Because he did not give up, the world changed. You can change your world too. One word. One sentence. One story at a time. Goodbye for now, my friend. I will see you in our next story. Sleep well. Dream big. And keep going. Always keep going.